And I imagine that the teams you work with, that there's an intent a lot of times to keep these projects hush hush and secret until they really are ready for them to be out there. So you guys have to work under a cloak of secrecy a lot of the time.
We do most of the time. Yeah, you're right. It's going to be about a launch of a new brand, or a new product or service. A lot of times, some sort of new offering. And it's funny because you had asked about the digital versus the dimensional, if you will, and a big component of what we do today is the digital kind of amplification of an experience.
Oh, okay.
During and after that experience. So that's a big component of it. And it's a big leveraging point. So it is important to keep these things that we're doing under wraps so that our customers can leverage that social media share of some really big, amazing, surprising, delightful event or object or happening or experience.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of 3D experiences, with 3D printing becoming more of a thing, is that something that you have utilized at all in your process?
Sure. Yeah, it's another tool. It's another process. It certainly hasn't taken over our process by any means. It's it's kind of like when a tool company comes out with a new sander or a new table saw or something. Like it's definitely a neat tool and something that can enhance our capabilities or give us a capability that we didn't have before, or maybe speed something up. So we do use 3D printing from time to time. It's certainly not a lion's share of what we do. A lot of what we do is really big in scale. So there's not as much room for 3D printing in large scale events or installations. But when we do smaller, custom kind of props or influencer gifts or things like that need to perform in a special way, we'll utilize 3D printing for that.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier that the company you got started about 20 years ago, and you weren't in Portland when the company started, right?
That's right. Yeah, I was down in San Francisco when it started.
And what were you doing at the time? What were you doing before you started Figure Plant?
Yeah, well, it's I sometimes have to answer that question about how it started even further back than that, and I'll somebody asked me that question once, and I said, well, I think I first really started this business when I was about 10, and I was really curious about how things were built and how things work, and I remember taking apart lawnmower engines in my bedroom, and just that, learning about how things go together and what makes them work, and kind of that physical three-dimensional world got me really curious. So, fast forward, to about 20 years ago, and I had been in the theater and film industries for a long time. I was a theater major in school, as an actor partially, but primarily as a designer and builder, and I learned all about designing and building theatrical scenery and props, and essentially supporting a story that was being told to an audience through the three-dimensional objects and environment of that story. So I worked in the professional theater world for about 10 years, and then I moved out of that and started working in feature film, and I did a couple years in the feature film industry and around the Pacific Northwest, and then decided to move to San Francisco and pursue my film career down there. I think the lack of research showed me then that there was no film industry really happening in San Francisco when I moved there. So that's kind of when it happened. I had, since there was no film industry, I said, well, I'll just start making things for people who need them made. And that started principally as like architects and interior designers, and I was doing some antique restoration work. And that's about when I realized, I can still make things that are in support of, a story or somebody who needs these things, but it doesn't have to be theater or film.